What's Goosebumps like as an adult? Well, as you'll find out in this video, it's surprisingly sad. In previous videos, we've looked at the first 9 books of the original series, and in this video, we'll be looking at The Ghost Next Door and The Haunted Mask. How do these stories stack up now that my brain is fully developed? And what about the TV episodes? Both of these books got a 2-parter TV adaptation. 2-parter? I hardly know her. Just a little joke for the intro. A haunted neighbor, a haunted mask. Time to debunk these 2 spirited stories and find out how scary they really were. Now, before we officially get started, I have an announcement to make. I made a Revisiting Goosebumps bingo card. They're randomly generated cards and you can play along as you watch the video. I have a feeling you'll hit bingo quicker than you think. Here's a sample Goose Bingo card. They should all be pretty self-explanatory. Some are phrases that Mr. Stein likes to reuse from story to story, like describing the main character's mouth as feeling like cotton, or one of the siblings thinking that they're a riot. And others are just general tropes like the TV episode cutting to commercial on a character screaming, or a jump scare that turns out to be the family pet. Now, there's so many of these that there's too many to fit on one card, which means whatever bingo card you get will not only be randomized, but it also won't have every trope on it. So you might not have the feels like cotton one, or the family pet jump scare. In other words, your Goose Bingo card is completely unique. Let me know in the comments if you played along, and let me know the timestamp of how early in the video you got bingo. You'll win the grand prize of comment upvotes, the most coveted reward of all. Now, I'm the self-appointed bingo master, or whatever they call them, and I'll call out bingo squares when I see them. I might miss some, so you're just gonna have to be okay with that. That's life, kid. On a side note, I like that we've paired an activity for children reading these books with an activity for senior citizens. Playing bingo. We're old souls and young at heart. Anyway, The Ghost Next Door is the 10th book in the original Goosebumps series, released in August 1993. Since Mr. Stein was now writing one of these books every month, the page count started dipping with this one. It's about 10 pages shorter than the average book up to this point. The cover's about as self-explanatory as the title. It's some neighborly ghost feet on a doormat. Oh, hey look, we got some red Converse on the cover. You already got 1 square for bingo. There's not much else to say about the illustration. I like the ones that show some kind of creature or character, but I understand why that would be kind of hard to do with this one. The color scheme here is orange and some kind of puke color. It matches Mr. Jacobus' illustration, so I won't complain about it too much. I just don't particularly like it. By the way, to clear up some confusion here I've seen in previous episodes, when I say color scheme, I'm referring to these 2 colors here. I'm not referring to any colors in the actual illustration. There's a lot of mean things I could say about how obvious I thought this distinction was, but I'm not a mean guy, so I'll just leave it at that. Overall, this is a very average Goosebumps cover to me, so I'll give it 2.5 out of 5 on the Necronomicon scale. The first page of The Ghost Next Door starts off the story in a strange way, with the main character, Hannah, discovering her room is on fire. Fire! But thankfully, it was just a dream. Mr. Stein's not even waiting for the end of the chapter anymore. He's inserting cliffhangers on the very first page. Her mouth feels like cotton, though. That's another bingo. Right away in this story, I found myself liking Hannah. One of her very first lines is telling her dream to, quote, get lost. Hey, dream, get lost. Throughout the book, she has a lot of moments like this where she's just talking to herself in a funny way. I'll try to point it out when it happens. Anyway, she says good morning to her twin brothers, Bill and Herb. The siblings think they're a riot. This opening scene is very different in the TV episode. So different that we're gonna have to actually revisit it later. Hannah goes outside when suddenly she gets a sharp pain in her back.
Oh, a sharp pain in your back when you get up in the morning. Too real! Am I right, fellow millennials?
A boy on a bike ended up hitting her. He says his name's Danny and he lives next door, which Hannah has trouble believing.
No way. Nobody's lived in that old place for years.
Hannah quizzes Danny on when he moved in, and she's astonished that she somehow didn't notice.
I know everything that happens in this neighborhood. I would have seen you moving in.
Guess we caught you when you weren't looking.
Unfortunately, the interrogation gets cut short by Bill asking Hannah to make Herb give him back his Game Boy. Ooh, is that an outdated pop culture reference? When Hannah turns back to say goodbye to Danny, she sees that he has disappeared.
Wait a sec. How'd you do that?
When we needed him most, he vanished. By the way, not to overwhelm you if you're playing Goose Bingo with us right now, but, well, since Danny just moved in, I'm afraid we also have the square just moved into a new house. That's 6 squares in only 10 pages. Now be honest, do you already have bingo? You wouldn't be lying to me, now would you? Lying about bingo? Our sacred Goosebumps tradition? If I find out that you tried to deceive me, I will do absolutely nothing about it. Literally, who cares? Let's get back to this children's horror story. Hannah's bored at home this summer, so she writes an irritated letter to her friend Janie, who's away at summer camp. She tells Janie she hopes that she gets poison ivy in places she can't scratch. Wow, Hannah's a little firecracker. It's kind of an extreme reaction, but the thing is, at least in the book version, Hannah's just that bored, and nobody seems to care. Hannah takes a walk out of boredom, and her neighbor, Mrs. Quilty, doesn't even respond when she says hi. Mrs. Quilty. More like Mrs. Bitchy. Sorry, I got kind of worked up there. I'm protective of Hannah. What can I say? There's a weird scene Hannah stumbles into on her walk where the grouchy postmaster, Mr. Chesney, is throwing rocks at a group of 3 boys that includes her neighbor Danny. He calls them troublemakers and tells them to get off government property, and they run off. On the way home, Hannah is accosted by some creepy shadowy figure that keeps calling out her name. She confronts the shadow, but it disappears. This mysterious shadowy figure appears many times throughout the book, and frankly, I'm not gonna mention it every time it happens. It's mostly the same thing every time. It shows up, it says, Hannah, and then it disappears. So if the shadow does anything other than that, I'll let you know, but it's gonna be a while. Interestingly, the TV episode decided to introduce the mysterious shadow in the very beginning. Hannah's writing the letter to her friend at summer camp, whose name they changed from Janie to Katie for some reason.
Dear Katie.
Look at how Hannah's typing this letter. Makes me laugh. Must be a really long word she's spelling because she doesn't even touch the spacebar.
Anyway.
She's writing the letter when suddenly she hears the voice. Hannah freaks out and starts locking all the doors and calling the police. I almost found it reminiscent of the infamous first scene in Scream. It's actually not totally out of left field to consider that this scene may be inspired by Scream. Scream released in 1996, and this Goosebumps episode aired in 1998. It might just be a coincidence, but it's possible it could be a brief homage. There's actually another acclaimed horror movie that I think was directly inspired by the book version of Ghost Next Door, but we'll get to that later. Anyway, Hannah tries calling 911, but something's wrong with the phone.
Yes, I have an emergency. I just told you. Aren't you listening to me?
Hello? Hello? Is anyone on the line? Hello?
There's something wrong with the phone.
The shadow throws a rock through the window for some reason, and then Hannah runs outside. Sure, Hannah, let's run straight towards the person who threw the rock. Makes sense. I also love how these nighttime shots are clearly just daytime shots with a blue filter over them. It's more expensive to shoot at night, but almost every Goosebumps episode featured nighttime scenes, so I'm not sure why they were trying to save on budget here. It might be because this was actually one of the very last Goosebumps episodes to air before the series was unceremoniously canceled. So they probably had rock bottom budgets to work with at this point. thanks to the series' waning popularity. Back to Hannah though, she's running from the shadow now before she trips and falls and looks up to see the shadow staring back at her. We're cutting to commercial on cue with a character screaming. That's another bingo square. When we come back, we see that the shadow is actually Danny.
You know, where I come from, we usually just say hello.
I was kind of surprised at how much the book and the TV adaptation differed. They have a lot of similar events, but the order is all shuffled around and everything happens slightly differently, which makes it hard to talk about the two stories simultaneously like I usually do. For example, that clip I just showed you where Hannah looks up and sees the shadow, but then it's really Danny, that happens in the book, but it happens all the way on page 43. And it's not the first time Hannah has met the shadow or Danny. So yeah, all the events are shuffled around quite a bit, and the episode probably deviates more from the book than any other Goosebumps adaptation we've seen so far. For example, the TV episode doesn't even mention Mrs. Quilty, which I'd argue is an improvement. By the way, just before Hannah looks up to see Danny, in the end of chapter cliffhanger, it describes the shadow having, quote, red eyes. I believe this falls under the bingo category. Mr. Stein straight up lied in the chapter cliffhanger. Now, Danny may not have red eyes or be a cackling shadow, but Hannah starts to notice some very suspicious things about him. First of all, he says he moved in next door, but she never saw a moving truck.
I know everything that happens in this neighborhood. I would have seen you moving in.
Danny says he goes to the same school as Hannah, but she's never seen him there, and he doesn't recognize any of the names of her classmates. Later, Hannah asks her mom if she saw Danny talking with her outside. Her mom says no. Hannah starts wondering, just who is this Danny character? She comes to the stunning realization that Danny might be a ghost.
You're not real. You're a ghost.
In the TV episode, Hannah says this line because the mysterious shadow attacks her in the cellar. Yeah, I don't get it either. Back to the book storyline. Hannah decides she's going to start spying on Danny and prove he's a ghost. From this point on, a lot of the story parallels the 8th book, The Girl Who Cried Monster. There's a lot of plotting and a lot of spying, but not the fun kind like balancing on a wheelbarrow. At one point, Hannah visits Danny, but only his mom is home, and his mom doesn't answer the door, despite Hannah knocking several times. Upon the realization that this is because Danny's mom is also a ghost, Hannah uttered a low moan, backed away from the light, off the stoop, and into the safety of darkness. Hannah's starting to really depress me. Time to get some new friends, girl. At this point, I'd argue that Danny is actually Hannah's only friend. Here she is again, writing her friend Janie a really mean letter saying she hopes she falls into a lake and drowns. Gee, I wonder why Janie's not writing her back. So yep, I'm counting this for the bingo square. The main character only has one friend. Things go on like this for a while. Hannah keeps spying on Danny, but never comes any closer to the truth. She even shares her theory that he's a ghost with her parents, and they of course don't believe her. But interestingly, Hannah starts getting some answers. Hannah confronts Danny about his mother completely ignoring her earlier. And well, he has an explanation.
Because she's deaf.
She's what?
Deaf, you know, as in she can't hear. I'm glad she can't, because it would have really hurt her feelings you coming here and acting all weird like this.
Danny's a little more subdued in the book version of the confrontation, but I kind of like how protective he is of her in the TV adaptation. Actually, I think the TV version gives both Danny and Hannah a little more personality overall. They have a little more chemistry. In the book, they mostly have awkward interactions that just kind of trail off after a while. For example, here's the aftermath of the mom reveal. After Danny reveals his mom is deaf, they kind of just awkwardly say goodbye to each other. But in the TV version, they joke around with each other to break the tension.
You must think I'm a complete loser.
Well, not a complete one.
There's even a nice moment where Hannah says she wants to connect with Danny's mom.
I think it's cool. I want to learn sign language now so I can talk to your mom.
Maybe I could teach you.
I'd like that.
I like the book version of Hannah because she's really aggressive and serious, which is unusual for a Goosebumps protagonist in my experience, but it results in these pointed, blunt conversations between her and Danny, and I actually think I prefer the episode's more lighthearted take on the two. But guess what? Their dynamic's about to change because Hannah finally confronts Danny about being a ghost.
You're not real! You're a ghost!
Hey, Danny, are you a ghost? She just straight up asks him this, out loud. You see, Hannah looked up information about Danny's home and discovered that there was a house fire with no survivors. She prints out the article and brings the information to Danny.
I got this story off the internet about our street and about this big house fire. And I just kind of thought you were dead.
But Danny notices something strange about the printout.
You said you lived at 49, right?
Right.
But you can't live there.
Why not?
Because 49 Cordina Way burned down 3 years ago.
And that's when Hannah comes to a cold realization. Danny's not the ghost. She is.
You're right. There is a ghost around here. It's you.
Yup, that's right. Suddenly, everything makes sense. Mrs. Quilty not responding to Hannah when she says hi. Janie never writing her back. Not recognizing any of the names of Danny's friends or classmates at school. And that bad dream of her room being on fire, it wasn't a dream at all. Her house really did burn down, with her and her family inside. The ghost next door isn't Danny, it's Hannah. Wow, what a twist. But as usual, the twists and turns don't stop there. The next one really blew my mind. And that's that this video is sponsored by Factor. Factor is a meal delivery service for chef-crafted, dietitian-approved meals sent straight to your door and ready to eat in just 2 minutes. Head to Factor75.com or click the link below and use code WOLF50 to get 50% off your first Factor box and 20% off your next month of orders. That's code WOLF50 at Factor75.com to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next month of orders. It's Halloween month, and I still haven't picked out my costume yet. It's a hard decision to make. A lot of finality to it. But picking my weekly meals with Factor has been easy. There's 35 wholesome meal options each week and 6 different meal preferences to choose from, including keto, calorie smart, vegan, and veggie. Dressing up yourself for Halloween can be hard, but dressing up your meals with Factor is easy. Head to Factor75.com or click the link below and use code WOLF50 to get 50% off your first Factor box and 20% off your next month of orders. That's code WOLF50 at Factor75.com to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next month of orders. Big thanks to Factor for sponsoring this video. Now, let's get back to this ghost business. Where were we? All right, Hannah's dead. The way they confirm this twist differs between the episode and the book. In the episode, Hannah ends up walking through Danny while he's trying to block her way.
Hannah, don't! It's not safe!
In the book, Danny falls down after chasing a ball and asks Hannah to help him up, except her hands go right through him. The TV and book adaptations diverge quite a bit from this point on. When Hannah discovers that she's the ghost, we're only halfway through the TV two-parter, but we're 3/4 way through the book. And this is because, for some reason, the TV show decides to give a ton of airtime to the Shadow. Remember him? I said I would tell you if the Shadow did anything but shamble around and groan Hannah's name, so here goes. The first time we hear the Shadow speak, it says to, quote, "Stay away from Danny." And that's about the only thing you hear from him until the very end. In the show, however, he's a little chatterbox.
I am a ghost. And I'm alone.
Don't be sad, Hannah. You'll always have me.
Don't be sad, Hannah. You'll always have me, the creepy dark shadow man. So what if you don't have any friends, any family, any future? You have me. You remember me, right? I yelled at you on the road and made you trip and fall. I threw that rock through your window. That was me. Don't you feel better now, knowing that I'm with you for eternity?
You no longer have any friends. Without me, you have nothing.
Turns out the Shadow has a plan. He's going to teach Hannah.
To teach me what?
How to be a ghost.
So yeah, there's this whole subplot where the Shadow teaches Hannah how to become a ghost. He ends up sounding like a Sith Lord most of the time.
You're holding back. You must concentrate harder. Use all your energy, all your strength.
Yeah, wonder if Emperor Palpatine over here is gonna end up being evil or not. It's just so up in the air. Anyway, the only important thing that happens here is Hannah learns to physically control objects as a ghost. Again, just to emphasize, none of this happens in the book. In fact, the guy she's pranking in this scene is Mr. Chesney. The book version of Mr. Chesney is a violent, angry man who not only throws rocks at Danny and his friends, but at one point even threatens them with a shotgun. Whoa, pretty intense. Now, here's the show's version of Mr. Chesney. Same name, totally different character. You know, that should probably be a bingo square. We'll take it under advisement for next time. Anyway, Chesney's an important character in this story. Danny's two little so-called friends, Alan and Fred, are troublemakers, and they love picking on Mr. Chesney. Here they are, telling Danny to steal Chesney's hand-carved mailbox. Charming guys. And yes, there is some bad bully dialogue for your bingo cards.
Okay, we decided to give you one more chance to prove yourself worthy of hanging out with us. Coolest guys in town.
What's that one last chance? Well, the bullies want Danny to prank Mr. Chesney one last time. This is their third run-in with Chesney in the book, but in the show, this is the first and only time they mess with him, so it doesn't hit the same. In the book, there's this whole saga with Chesney's hand-carved mailbox. The bullies want Danny to pull it out of the ground and wreck it, and to prove himself to them, he finally does. But they aren't satisfied with just that. Hannah watches in horror as the bullies force Danny to invade Chesney's home through an unlocked window. Why? Who knows? In the show, the bullies have a much more specific plan.
Stink bomb. Guaranteed to turn your home or office into a stinking sewer of rotten eggs and dead fish.
This is Alan, the mean one of the two, if you can believe it. The episode's version of Alan does this half-baked Jim Carrey impersonation. Not sure what the thought behind it was, but it was kind of funny.
Hey, this is a one-time only offer. Take it or leave it.
So Danny sneaks into Mr. Chesney's house to cause trouble. One thing leads to another, and the matches he was using for the stink bomb start a fire. The book's versions of events is a lot more vague. There's no stink bomb. The boys just kind of go in there with a general plan of causing mayhem, and the fire starts, well, we don't know how. Alan stumbles outside, muttering to himself, "The matches. We didn't mean to. Yeah, thanks for the insight, Alan.
The coolest guys in town.
The blaze spreads quickly, and Hannah runs inside to save Danny from the fire. The Shadow appears and tries to stop Hannah from saving him, though, because apparently the true identity of the Shadow is Danny's ghost. And he claims that when Danny perishes in the fire, he will switch places with him?
He is destined to leave the land of the living, and I will at last have a shape, a body, like you. I will become a ghost, and there's nothing you can do to stop me.
Okay, so yeah, the Shadow is my least favorite part of the story. It kind of feels like Mr. Stein was just recycling the mirror people from Let's Get Invisible, because I don't understand this weird plan the Shadow has. So your plan is that when Danny dies, he'll move on to the afterlife, and you'll get to pretend to be his ghost and haunt people? Is that it? You know what? We're done with the wannabe Sith Lord over here. I'm chalking this one up to the bingo square. Antagonist has no clear motivation. Anyway, you see the parallel here, right? Hannah and her family perished in a house fire, and now Danny faces the same fate. So Hannah's not only desperate to save her friend, she's desperate for redemption. She doesn't want to let Danny die, but especially not in the way that she and her family did. So she goes all in to save him from the inferno. Once again, the TV and book depart here with what happens next. In the book, Hannah physically pulls an unconscious Danny out of the burning house. You might think it would make sense for the TV version to do this too, since we had that scene earlier where the shadow was teaching Hannah how to physically move things.
Use all your energy, all your strength.
But try as she might, Hannah can't physically move Danny's unconscious body. Instead, she does something that I found more interesting.
Do you hear that? There's someone inside.
Hannah plays Mr. Chesney's piano, signaling to Chesney outside that someone is still in the burning house. This heroic version of Chesney in the TV adaptation braves the flames, picks Danny up, and carries him to safety. Danny and Hannah share a nice, brief moment together before Hannah finally moves on to the afterlife, fulfilling her purpose at last. Her family even comes to get her.
Hannah? Hannah? You've done a good job, honey. It's time to come home.
Don't worry, we're going to talk about how unnecessarily sad this story is in just a moment. We've got one more tear-jerking moment to make it through. Just hold on. Finally, the story ends with Hannah calling out a final farewell to her friend Danny, but she's not sure if he heard her or not. Yeesh. Thankfully, in the show, they make it very clear that, yes, he heard her.
Goodbye, Danny.
Thank you, Hannah. Just a friend, Mom. I'm just talking to a friend.
All right, so that was the saddest Goosebumps story I've ever read. Let's talk about it. The Ghost Next Door. What a twist, huh? In fact, you may have seen the twist coming, thanks to being preconditioned by a very famous horror movie that came out just a few years later.
I want to see what you're talking about.
Why?
I like scary things.
M. Night Shyamalan's breakthrough psychological horror The Sixth Sense, released in 1999, 6 years after The Ghost Next Door was written and just 1 year after the episode aired. There's no way to talk about this without spoiling it, but The Sixth Sense is such a notorious movie and is referenced so often in horror media discussions that I'd be surprised if you hadn't already heard about it. The twist is, and I'm giving you some time to pause and skip ahead now, is that the main character, played by Bruce Willis, is actually dead the whole time. There's a lot of hints throughout the movie, like the fact that none of the characters directly interact with him aside from the child character that can see dead people, played by Haley Joel Osment. In the last Goosebumps Revisited video, I talked about the similarities between the story of Welcome to Camp Nightmare and Shyamalan's film The Village. The similarities between the two were something that I felt were more than just a coincidence. However, people in the comments of the last video were quick to point out that The Village is actually even more similar to the 1995 young adult novel Running Out of Time, to the point that the film is alleged to have been plagiarized from it. So that got me thinking, did something similar happen here? Was The Sixth Sense, quote, inspired by the Goosebumps book, The Ghost Next Door? As it turns out, I found there was more of a buzz online about The Sixth Sense borrowing heavily from an Are You Afraid of the Dark episode, The Tale of the Dream Girl, which aired in March 1994. Still after The Ghost Next Door, by the way. I watched this episode of Are You Afraid of the Dark, and yeah, I can see it. The main character finds out they've been dead the whole time. But that's really the only similarity these three stories share. In an interview, Shyamalan was directly asked about the Are You Afraid of the Dark episode, and his response was that he had never seen or even heard of the show, which I find hard to believe. Shyamalan claims, like he often does, that the inspiration for the film came from himself. He inspired himself, you see? Now, I'd love to take his word for it. I mean, a main character that doesn't initially realize that they're dead isn't that much of a stretch to come up with. I mean, if we wanted to get really granular with these things, we'd recognize that once again, The Twilight Zone was the first to do it. The season 1 episode, The Hitchhiker, stars a character that doesn't realize she's dead until the final scene, when she discovers that she died in a tragic automobile accident. Meanwhile, the mysterious hitchhiker she desperately tries to avoid during the episode turns out to be Death himself. There's actually a few Twilight Zone episodes where the main character doesn't know they're dead, including one based on a short story that dates even further back. The 1890 short story, An Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge by Ambrose Bierce, also stars a main character that doesn't realize he's dead until the final twist. Basically what I'm saying is, this is old stuff. Was The Sixth Sense borrowed from Goosebumps, or Are You Afraid of the Dark? Well, honestly, I wouldn't be surprised. There's actually quite a few instances of Shyamalan's films being similar enough to young adult or even children's horror media that it seems beyond coincidental. With all that said, I actually think The Sixth Sense is probably the best portrayal of this trope I've ever seen. There's a reason it single-handedly launched Shyamalan's career, and why after seeing it, you probably walk into every horror movie or horror show looking for signs that maybe the main character is dead. Who's directly addressing them? More importantly, who isn't directly addressing them? This kind of sixth sense, if you'll pardon the pun, actually comes in handy so often. There have been so many TV shows where I've immediately noticed that none of the cast directly interacts with a certain suspicious side character. It's gotten to the point that I kind of wish they'd stop trying to do this twist anymore. Just give it a rest for a couple decades, guys. We've had enough. The trope is old now, but that didn't stop it from being effective the very first time you experienced it. And for a lot of people, that experience was The Ghost Next Door. So by the way, while I was looking into this topic, I found this metal album called A Feast for the Sixth Sense by a band called The Ghost Next Door. So, looks like the connection between the two stories was strong enough for these guys to make a little dad joke out of it. I love finding stuff like this. So, let's rate this thing and move on to the next one. The Ghost Next Door is a pretty sad book. Death is always a possibility that the child protagonist in Goosebumps face, but not really. Right? I know as an adult when I'm reading a Goosebumps story that Mr. Stein isn't just gonna have one of the children die. It's just not in good taste. But The Ghost Next Door is an exception. Finding out that Hannah is not only dead, but her and her entire family died in a house fire is possibly the most tragic event that happens in any Goosebumps story. And I haven't mentioned this until now, but in the book at least, the fire was Hannah's fault. My least favorite character in all of fiction, Mrs. Quilty, explains that Hannah and her twin brothers had a campfire going on in their backyard, but when they went inside to go to sleep, they hadn't completely put the fire out, and so it spread to the house after they had gone to bed. So when Hannah remembers how she died, not only does the memory of the fire come flooding back, but she also remembers that she was partly responsible. It's pretty heavy stuff for a children's book. That part, combined with this description of Hannah whimpering and shrinking into the darkness because she feels so cold and alone in the world. Oh my God. Mr. Stein, you really are a sadist. While this may be the saddest Goosebumps story, it's also one with a weirdly happy ending. Hannah moves on to the afterlife with the support of her entire family, and she was able to save the life of a friend among the living that she made. So I'm choosing to focus on that part as my main takeaway from The Ghost Next Door. Now, let's rate it. For spine shivers, which measures how scary the story is, I'll give the book a 2 out of 5. There's not much that's scary about it. The shadow brings most of the horror elements, and for most of the story, he just kinda skulks around and says Hannah's name a lot, then disappears. And then at the end, he reveals his absolutely terrible plan. Underwhelming to say the least. Honestly, and I hate to say it, but I'd even say the episode was a 1. But hey, scariness is only one aspect of the story. For funny bones, that's measuring how funny the story is, obviously, I think the book was a 2 and the show was a 3. Most of the humor comes from Hannah and Danny's banter, and they have more chemistry in the show version. Overall, it's not a particularly funny story though. And that leaves us with Closet Skeletons, which measures the effectiveness of the twist. And I'm giving the book a perfect 5 out of 5. Yep, that's right. Perfect twist. It's maybe less effective now since the twist has been done so many times, but like I said in the last section, many people's first experience with this twist was with this book in the early 90s. The show, I'm giving a 4 just because they showed the twist so early on, and I think it's more effective when it's closer to the end like it is in the book. Overall grade, The Ghost Next Door gets an A for the book and B for the show. Honestly, I think a lot of the dialogue and events are kind of boring, but the story is carried by the twist. The twist isn't just for shock value like it is in many of the other entries in the series. It changes the entire dynamic of the story and gives it an emotional component that's missing from most Goosebumps stories. It's a story that sticks with you after it's over, which is rare for children's media. The episode does its best, and it's mostly solid, but I think part 2 is really bloated with all the shadow stuff, and I wish they'd compress that part of the story like the book did. Very solid story all told, though. Well, we've gotten through the saddest Goosebumps story. Now how about the scariest Goosebumps story? The Haunted Mask isn't just any Goosebumps story, it's one of the most well-known in the series, and possibly the most well-received. Even Mr. Stein says it's his favorite.
People always ask me, what's your favorite Goosebumps book? I always say The Haunted Mask.
Some even say it's earned the title, Scariest Goosebumps Story. Are they right? Let's find out. The 11th book in the series, The Haunted Mask, was published in September 1993, and while the book has a great cover and a reputation of its own, the main reason for The Haunted Mask's notoriety is the TV episode. The Haunted Mask was the series premiere of the Goosebumps TV series, airing on October 27, 1995. And it had almost 8 million live viewers. It also had a very successful home video release, selling 500,000 copies in just 1 week.
Wow.
The episode is possibly the main reason why the story is so revered, and I'm excited to get into it. But first, we gotta rate the book cover. Listen, I'm not gonna waste your time here. Scary mask, great colors, it's a 5 out of 5 on the Necronomicon scale. We're not even gonna beat around the bush and act like it's not one of the best Goosebumps covers. This is legendary stuff. No notes. Alright, we get it. The cover's great, the TV episode was chosen for the series premiere. All signs are pointing to this one being a banger. But is it? Let's dig in. The story stars 11-year-old Carly Beth, who's an unusual protagonist in the series so far. While the first 10 stories largely feature characters that are popular in their friend groups, like Greg from Say Cheese and Die, for example, or characters that are even considered leaders among their peers, like Billy from Welcome to Camp Nightmare, or even characters that pick on and make fun of others, like Lucy from A Girl Who Cried Monster. In The Haunted Mask, Carly Beth is pretty much the opposite of them all. She's a so-called scaredy cat, and is the victim of constant pranks from her classmates trying to get a reaction out of her, which they often do.
What's wrong, Carly Beth?
Carly Beth is played by Catherine Long, who's basically the Daniel Day-Lewis of Goosebumps actors, and one of the main reasons why the episode is so good. For example, the showrunners were going to use a rubber worm for this scene, but Catherine insisted they use a real worm in the sandwich for the take. They ended up shooting this scene 12 times. Now that's what I call getting into character. Catherine not only advocated for worm realism on set, but she also brought key emotional moments to life and really made you relate to Carly Beth, even when her own friends don't.
You're so scareable, that's all.
I am not. Come on, that's not fair.
Carly Beth, come on.
Oh, I might be afraid sometimes, but I mean...
Everyone knows you're afraid of everything.
I don't like being scared. I don't like being afraid, okay?
The first quarter of the story features Mr. Stein's favorite literary device, pranks. Everyone loves scaring Carly Beth.
Somebody's out there. Somebody. Or something.
Oh, it's the worst!
These jokers are Chuck and Steve, the main perpetrators of all the pranking. The worm sandwich was their idea too, no surprise there. Carly Beth eventually gets fed up with being pranked and vows revenge on Chuck and Steve. She starts planning a way to scare them back for a change. You can probably already see where this is going, right? It's a classic Stephen King-esque tale of revenge. Or is it? With Goosebumps, you never know. By the way, how's your blank bingo card going so far? You want some squares? Well, unfortunately, I only have a couple. I only have a couple squares to spare. Well, the episode cut to commercial on a scream already, so there's one. Throughout the story, Carly Beth basically only talks to one person outside her family, and that's Sabrina. So yeah, she's only got one friend. Finally, when Carly Beth gets home from the worm sandwich incident, we get a classic sibling prank.
No, you jerk it off me!
This is Carly Beth's little brother, Noah. Does he look familiar to you at all? Well, the actor is Cody Jones, who was also Danny in The Ghost Next Door 3 years later.
You know, where I come from, we usually just say hello.
Honestly, I didn't plan this at all. It's just an incredible coincidence that the two episodes I'm covering in this video both feature the same actor. It's kind of funny. At home, Carly Beth's mother, who is something of an artist, surprises her daughter with a sculpture of her own face. Check it out. Totally normal sculpture. Nothing absolutely horrifying about it.
It's kind of creepy, Mom.
What, don't you like it?
I don't like it.
All jokes aside, the parents in Goosebumps stories range from completely aloof to a little concerned but ultimately hands off. Carly Beth's mom is great though. Maybe she shows her love in peculiar ways, but she means really well. She even made Carly Beth a surprise duck costume for Halloween.
You said you thought it might be fun to be a duck for Halloween. I made one for you.
Oh, yeah, duck costume. Great, thanks, Mom.
Now, maybe I'm just getting soft in my old age, but I thought it was touching. Unfortunately, not everyone agrees. Like Carly Beth.
Last thing I want to be on Halloween is cute. I want to be scary this time.
Yeah, on second thought, maybe throw that sculpture in the garbage. Or set it on fire. Maybe attach some cinder blocks to it and throw it off a bridge. Nothing good is gonna come from keeping that thing in the house. Anyway, like Carly Beth said though, she wants to be scary for Halloween this year to get back at Chuck and Steve. Late in the afternoon on Halloween, she goes to a nearby party store to buy a scary mask. The store owner is a little weird, but he tells her to pick one quickly before he closes. Unfortunately, nothing he has is scary enough for her. She needs something that will get Chuck and Steve good. While he's on a phone call though, Carly sees some really scary masks in the back room. 6 horrifying masks in a row, culminating in this one. Yeesh. Now, the mask on the TV episode doesn't look exactly like the one on the book cover, which looks kind of like an orc from Warcraft, but I'd argue it's an improved design. I mean, just look at this thing. Okay, that is one of the scariest masks that I've ever seen. Can you imagine seeing that thing around somewhere? I think I'd burn the place down. I couldn't find any details of who exactly designed these masks for the show, but they're honestly really well done. They kind of remind me of the Cenobites from Hellraiser. The only critique I have is that the main mask looks a little too much like a Ferengi from Star Trek, but I've always thought the Ferengi looked kind of creepy, so I guess it still works for me. The store owner catches Carly Beth looking at the masks and is very upset. These masks are not for sale. Carly Beth drives a hard bargain though, and she ends up convincing the shop owner to sell her the mask, although he's really not happy about it. Interestingly, in the episode, the shop owner never agrees to sell it to her, and she ends up just throwing the money at him and running out of the store. Not sure why they changed it from the book for this scene. Pretty much everything else has been exactly like the source material so far. Wait, what? So this is weird, right? This looks exactly like the one from the show, and it just kind of appeared back there. It's strange. Normally I'd want to throw it away, but I kind of want to wear it instead.
Bye-bye, Curly Beth. Bye-bye. Wow.
Halloween night is here, and Carly Beth is already scaring people with the mask, starting with her little brother Noah.
Who are you?
It's your sister, idiot. After she's done scaring Noah, Carly Beth has some trouble taking the mask off.
Hey, what is this? My mask, it won't come off.
Okay, just wanted to check. The moment when the mask gets stuck is our first sign that something isn't right. When she first puts it on, she comments that the mask is very tight on her face, and it's also very warm and has a weird, sour smell. Things are looking bad, but false alarm, she manages to get it off. Still, she really freaked out Noah.
How'd you change your voice like that? That was the scariest part.
Oh yeah, Carly Beth's voice in the mask is described about 100,000 times in this book as raspy. The raspy voice is one of Mr. Stein's favorite devices. He uses it for monsters, ventriloquist dummies, masked 11-year-old girls. In Goosebumps, everyone's capable of rasping at any moment. I guess you could say the voice is always within our rasp. Carly Beth prepares to go out for the night, but she decides the mask isn't scary enough by itself. So she decides to put her mom's sculpture of her head on the end of a broom handle and parade around the neighborhood with it. She gleefully notes that it looks like she's carrying her real head around on a stick. This is the visual that really takes it over the top for me. If it was just Carly Beth in a mask, that would be fine, but the fact that she carries around what she calls her, quote, real head on a spike is a really creative idea by Mr. Stein. Carly Beth begins her rampage around the neighborhood, scaring random kids with her mask, and all the while, her real head silently looks on with a blank expression, helpless to stop what's about to happen to the little goblin that's wielding her.
Yeah! I'm crazy, alright? I'm crazy!
Carly Beth meets up with her only friend, Sabrina, whose costume is, quote, Catwoman. They make a joke about this in the 2024 graphic novel about how Mr. Stein was very careful to not infringe on any other Catwoman properties out there when describing Sabrina's costume. Sabrina's a little concerned by Carly Beth's sudden sinister aura.
It looks so real. Where'd you get it?
Oh, it's me. It's who I used to be.
So she starts quizzing Carly Beth about the mask, and Carly starts getting angry. The situation escalates very quickly, and in the book at least, Carly Beth grabs Sabrina and starts choking her. Man, in the last book, we were getting choked up. And in this one, we're getting choked out. Now, obviously, in the episode, they can't show one kid choking another kid, so they opt for this awkward alternative.
Shut up! Shut up! Shut up!
It's okay, though. When Carly Beth was choking out Sabrina, she was just kidding, so everything's okay. Geez, Sabrina, lighten up.
I'm just staying in character, you know, get me in the mood.
Well, you're doing a good job.
She continues to terrorize random kids around the neighborhood, even stealing an entire bag of candy from one of them. Finally, she decides she's had enough practice. It's time to go after Chuck and Steve. One thing I found interesting about the Haunted Mask that was a big departure from previous books is that the chapter cliffhangers are different. Instead of the chapter ending on something scaring the main character, the chapters end on the main character plotting to scare others. Chapter 5 ends with her vowing to scare Chuck and Steve. Chapter 9 ends with her excited to scare her brother. Chapter 11 ends with her getting the idea for the sculpture on the broom handle. And Chapter 13 ends with her planning another scare. You get the idea. The chapter endings are optimistic from her point of view, but as the reader, we see the endings as indicating she's being influenced more and more by the mask. I just thought it was a nice touch, and it's refreshing to not have every other chapter end with a jump scare or a prank or something. Chuck and Steve are hanging out at the cemetery by themselves, like the losers they are.
16 men on a dead man's chest. Yo ho ho, and away we go.
And here comes Carly Beth. This is the moment she's been waiting for the entire story. Her decapitated head bobbing up and down as she sprints down the dark streets like a hungry animal. She can hardly wait to put these guys in their place. Just wait till Chuck and Steve get a load of her. She got him. She got him good. Chuck asks if it's Carly Beth, while Steve is a little slower on the take and asks her who she is. She points to the head on a stick and says, "That's Carly Beth." What happens next differs from the book to the episode. In the book, she basically mugs Chuck and Steve for their candy, but I like what they did in the episode better. She demands that Chuck and Steve apologize to the head.
Apologize to her. Apologize!
Sorry, Carly Beth. We're sorry. Sorry again.
Help me.
The head talks. It's all over. Pack it up. We can end the story right there. Carly Beth is so elated she managed to scare Chuck and Steve that she runs off without her real head, which lies forgotten on the ground.
Bye-bye, scaredy cat. Bye-bye.
In the TV version, there's a minor but important difference. Instead of forgetting the head, she buries it. I kind of prefer the book version where she just forgets it. Satisfied with her revenge, she meets back up with Sabrina for an end-of-the-night recap over their baskets of candy. But she quickly finds herself in a familiar situation. When she tries to take the mask off, she discovers she can't. In fact, she even says she forgot she was wearing a mask. Just thought I'd check again. Sabrina and Carly try to work together to remove the mask, but nothing seems to work. Finally, Sabrina comes to a horrifying realization.
There's no bottom to this mask. There's no line in between the mask and your skin. There's no place I can reach my hand in.
The two girls panic as they discover that it isn't a mask anymore. The mask has become her real face. Carly runs out of the house to find answers, and she heads straight for the party store, where the owner reveals he's been waiting for her. Carly pleads with him to remove the mask, but he says he cannot. He can't remove it because it isn't a mask. It's a real face. By the way, she tries to open her mouth, but no sound comes out. Bingo? The shop owner reveals that the row of masks in the back room is called the Unloved. He goes into kind of an anticlimactic spiel about how he grew them in his laboratory as experiments, and they all used to be beautiful, but they grew uglier with time.
No matter what I did, deformity set in. Ugliness.
This is the explanation that the book goes with. I find the whole experiment angle to be really boring. Very much prefer what they went with for the TV show, which is that the Unloved are all masks that the shop owner made for himself.
I was like you. I did not love myself. I made these faces to hide behind them, to hide my faults. But the faults were inside me. That's what infected the faces, turned them into monsters. Like this one is turning now.
That's right. The shop owner's current face is his latest mask. And while he looks mostly normal on the outside, this mask is beginning to become ugly too, and will soon join the ranks of the other Unloved. I think this is a way cooler explanation for the masks, and it fits much better with the themes in the story, but we'll talk more about that later. The shop owner tells Carly Beth that the mask can only be removed with a symbol of love. It's at this moment that the unloved come to life and begin coming after Carly Beth. At first she tries to run, but her legs feel like jello. But she soon regains her composure and starts running down the street, back to the cemetery. She brings out her mother's sculpture, her real head, and shakes it at the unloved until they leave. The book version is cooler, though I understand why it would have been harder to show on film. Carly Beth pulls the hollow plaster of Paris head over her own and wears it like a mask to hide from the unloved. After they leave, she removes the haunted mask and feels like herself again. She goes home, reunites with her mother, and tells her how much she means to her. It's looking like things are over. Before the final twist, the mask is now being worn by her little brother Noah. Wow, what a wild ride. But now we can finally... What's the deal? It's stuck. I can't get the mask off. Just kidding, it came off easy. Now let's talk about the haunted mask. Is it really the scariest Goosebumps story? Well, honestly, no, I don't think it is. I think it's unique in a lot of ways, and it's probably one of my favorites, but scariest story? I mean, I guess we'll check back in when we finish book number 62, which is Monster Blood 4, by the way. Trust me, I'm not looking forward to it. But right now, I'd have to say no. The TVE episode is certainly one of the scariest, mostly because of the incredible mask and Catherine Long's performance. I was reading that she not only insisted on using a real worm for the sandwich scene, but she also insisted on doing all her own voiceover. So every time you hear the haunted mask voice, that's her.
Poor Carly Beth didn't want to give up her head tonight, but I took it anyway.
Actually, I think the haunted mask might be a little better than just the scariest Goosebumps story. It's possibly the only one we've read so far that has a genuine feel-good message. Carly Beth doesn't like herself as she is, so she rejects herself and adopts a new persona with the mask. It's fun at first until she realizes she's permanently losing herself in the process.
What are you supposed to be? I'm supposed to be mean, but I'm not. I'm supposed to be mean, but I'm not.
It isn't until she completes her journey of self-acceptance that she defeats the evil. As adults, it may seem a little corny, but hey, maybe a corny message every now and then actually helps some people. Kids especially face cruelty from their peers and struggle with their self-image. I actually think it's pretty cool that Mr. Stein didn't just pump out cynical, schlocky horror stories for kids. Every once in a while, he wrote one with an authentic message. And I have a feeling that some kids needed that message of self-acceptance from the haunted mask, whether they realized it or not. So when I think of the haunted mask, I don't necessarily think of a scary story, I think of a good one. Well, most iterations of it at least. Alright, let's talk about the Disney Plus version of The Haunted Mask. We did this once before for Say Cheese and Die, so we're bringing it back. If you're not aware, there's a Goosebumps pseudo-anthology series on Disney Plus and Hulu. The reaction to it has been mixed, mainly because they take a ton of creative liberties with the classic stories and have them all happen to this cast of characters that go to the same school. And while I didn't mind the Say Cheese and Die adaptation, the Haunted Mask one was very disappointing to me. The story stars Isabella, a normal AV Club student on the outside, but a quirky internet troll on the inside.
Nice shirt. Does it come in your size?
Excuse you, clumsy? Sorry, Allison. That was my bad.
Isabella is invisible to most of her classmates, who straight up ignore her in the hallways and even call her by the wrong name at times.
Hey, Susan.
Hey.
So she gets back at them through trolling. She stumbles upon the Haunted Mask, which looks very different in this show. It's more of a traditional ceramic mask with a blank expression. For some reason, she wears it and becomes a hit at the costume party. Ooh, look at me. Aren't I so mysterious in this boring mask? Why is anyone impressed by this? I guess the idea here was that the mask gave her the confidence to express herself that she previously only had with her online troll persona, but I don't know, it doesn't really work for me. Isabella comes home from the party elated though, and so does the mask. Look, it had a great time too. The next day, one of Isabella's thrill-seeking classmates wrecks her drone, and the high school guidance counselor isn't holding him accountable. Thanks to the power of the mask, the formerly mild-mannered Isabella doesn't accept this and lets the guidance counselor have it.
And you're worse than an idiot. You're weak.
This is the Goosebumps Plus version of The Mask's influence. Much grittier and more grounded than choking your best friend because they're talking too much. Isabella takes matters into her own hands and takes revenge on the guy who wrecked her drone. And as she's really getting into it, her mask transforms her face into a real-life troll. Yeah. You know, when the literal children's book has a more subtle message and sense of nuance than you do in your new gritty young adult version, I think there's a problem. Isabella comes home and just starts wrecking the place. Her brother, who's not a prankster like Carly Beth's brother Noah, by the way, this guy loves his sister. He can't believe what he's seeing, and he cries out to her.
Is he?
Isabella corners her brother in their clubhouse in the backyard, where he makes a final plea.
I'm here! I'm Ellen! I'm here! To me! No!
She realizes what she's doing and tries to pry the mask off, resulting in this incredible response from the mask.
You were meant to be a troll. You're weak.
Just in case you didn't understand the parallel they were trying to establish here, the mask just spells it out for you. She's a troll both online and offline now. Get it? Anyway, Isabella just kind of rips the mask off, and that's that. They have a fun little scene at the creek where they dispose of the mask to close things out.
Should we say a prayer or something?
Rot in hell?
Rot in hell.
Rot in hell!
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 Wow. What a fascinating alternate take on the haunted mask. And by fascinating, of course, I mean pointless. They tried to subvert the events of the original here, where instead of Isabella going on a journey of self-acceptance like Carly Beth did, she goes on a journey of self-rejection. She seems normal on the outside, but on the inside, she harbors the dark secret that she's this horrible little troll. And at the end, she rejects that nasty part of herself. But what makes it not work for me is that there's no catalyst for the rejection. She just kind of comes to the realization that she's about to hurt her brother, and she stops herself. There's no real arc to her behavior. Stuff just kind of happens. I don't want to make it sound like I'm a Goosebumps Plus hater, though, because honestly, I think the series is kind of fun for what it is. It's just that their adaptation of The Haunted Mask is particularly awful. It's like they completely missed the point of the original story, which seems impossible. Also, I just don't like the design of the mask in this one. The ceramic mask with the blank face had potential, but it lost me when it just ended up turning her into Gollum. The graphic novel version of the Haunted Mask that I've been showing pages from during this video has a similar look to their version of the mask. But that look works for the art style in the graphic novel, which is very cartoonish. In Goosebumps Plus, it just comes across underwhelming. Overall, it's a bad adaptation of a beloved Goosebumps classic. If you want to check out a modern adaptation of the story that's actually very good and faithful to the original, I highly recommend the graphic novel that was just published last month, actually. It's beautifully illustrated by artist Maddie Gonzalez and really keeps the spirit of the story intact. Well, I think that about covers all I wanted to say about The Haunted Mask. Let's rate this thing and get out of here. Ooh, what am I gonna rate it? Ooh, what am I gonna rate it? What a mystery. For spine shivers, or how scary the story was, I'd give the book a 3, and the episode? Well, why not? I'll give it a 5. There's only one other episode I can think of that might be a 5 out of 5 on the scare scale, so we don't want to be too stingy. The mask design is great, and the whole idea of the mask slowly taking over your body and personality, it definitely gets the job done in the scare department. The book just doesn't have as good of a twist for the shop owner, and honestly, I think this story just fits a visual medium better. For Funny Bones, I mean, I'm giving both of them a 1. It's probably the least funny story I've read so far from Mr. Stein, but that's fine. You know, humor wouldn't have fit the themes anyway. Finally, for Closet Skeletons, which measures the twist ending, I'm guessing the twist in this case would be that Noah puts on the mask next. As twist endings go, it's pretty weak. I think I'd give both a 1 for this category too. Also, not to spoil, but there is a Haunted Mask 2, and it's not clear whether the ending to the first book is canon or not. So that hurts it too. But the points don't matter a whole lot here because the book gets an overall grade of B. It's not the scariest story or my favorite, but it's still very good. Not quite as good as the show version, which gets an A. When I tell you that the mask design and Catherine Long's performance carried this episode, I mean it. It holds up very well on rewatch. I also like the episode exclusive version of The Shop Owner too. With that, it's time to check the Dread Sheet. Yeah, that's right, the Dread Sheet, formerly known as the Grizzly Graph. This is where we keep track of all the grades throughout the series. Big thanks to the person in the comments for suggesting the rename. I tried to resist renaming it, but it was so good I couldn't help myself. We're finally done with the first set of 10 stories, and we have, let's see here, 51 left to go. At this rate, I'll be making these videos for another decade. Wow. Hope you enjoyed this episode of Revisiting Goosebumps. If you'd like to watch previous videos in the series, or future ones, there's a playlist in the description. Speaking of future ones, coming up in part 6, we'll be checking out Be Careful What You Wish For. That's the wrong book. Be Careful What You Wish For. And Piano Lessons Can Be Murder. And possibly, if we have time, The Werewolf of Fever Swamp. But I haven't decided if that's going to get its own solo video or not, so we'll see. Thanks for watching, and until next time,
have a scary day, everyone.